So I want to bring you a couple updates pertaining to illegal immigration, a subject that we have been, of course, talking about at great length for good reason. Now, another topic of frequent mention on this program has been not just the crime crisis across the country, but especially and specifically here in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, where the numbers are atrocious. We've seen some marginal improvements in some other major cities, not compared to, for example, pre-COVID, 2019 or before that, not the good old days by any stretch, but at least down from the disturbing highs of 2020 and 2021. And a lot of those highs were caused by progressive policies, the rhetoric of politicians, what they were willing to indulge and allow, the types of things that they twisted themselves into pretzels to suddenly support, and then they kind of run away from it when it becomes more politically unpalatable. We've talked through all of that for quite a while here, but D.C. keeps sliding worse and worse into the abyss. Like, they can't even point to the relative improvement that other jurisdictions are trying to, because it's just horrible here in the capital city of our nation. So on that theme, a couple weeks ago, we mentioned briefly on this show that 3 D.C. police officers had been shot in this standoff, this siege at a man's apartment. Back at the time, I'm looking at the ABC News story from Valentine's Day, so February 14th, just about 2 weeks ago. Headline, 3 D.C. police officers shot trying to serve warrant. Alleged gunman surrenders. Thank God all 3 officers ultimately suffered non-life-threatening gunshot wounds. So this guy barricaded himself in his house, in his apartment. These officers showed up trying to serve an arrest warrant. Apparently, one of the charges involved cruelty to animals, so this was a very ugly case. They tried to make contact with this person in the home. Then they tried to breach the home when he wouldn't come out. At that point, quote, the suspect fired at them. And he hit all 3 of them. They all sustained bullet wounds. And as I said, thank goodness, thank God, they all survived. They weren't hit anywhere that posed a mortal threat to their lives, but some of that could have just been luck. This guy shot 3 cops in the middle of the day as they were trying to do their job, do their duty. And God bless them for that. It's got to be very hard to be a cop in this city, especially when you've got a psycho city council that does not have your back. Just the opposite, as a matter of fact. And a mayor that tries to straddle the fence but is often bullied and influenced by these left-wing hardcore radicals that dominate progressive circles in arguably one of the bluest cities in the country. Well, it's not arguably. It is one of the bluest cities in the country, arguably the most Democratic city in the country. Like, if Democrats had a bad night, they would get 94% of the vote in Washington, D.C. Now, why do I bring this up? Why mention a police shooting from 2 weeks ago when none of the cops, fortunately, were killed? What relevance does that have today? Well, here's the relevance. If you might guess where I'm going with this, with 2 of the strands that I've mentioned coming together. My former colleague at townhall.com for a number of years, Julio Rosas, he is well-sourced within law enforcement. And so last night he tweeted the following. A law enforcement source has confirmed to me the man who recently shot 3 D.C. police officers. He has various names, including aliases and all of that. Well, whoever his actual name is, whatever it is, whoever he is, this man is in the United States illegally. He has an active ICE deportation order against him, Rosas reports. And he says he's reached out to ICE for further comment. So according to Rosas and law enforcement sources, the man who took pot shots and hit 3 Washington, D.C. police officers is in the United States illegally. This is a revelation that came yesterday, last evening, on the heels of another news cycle surrounding the horrible, brutal murder of that girl, that young woman down at University of Georgia, Laken Riley. Nursing student, her whole life ahead of her, and an illegal immigrant. This is the allegation from authorities. They say they've got the evidence against him, who came into this country in 2022 illegally, then got paroled in by Biden, then went to New York, broke the law, got arrested, released on multiple charges, then skipped the state, left, went down to Georgia, went to a sanctuary city within Georgia, because New York's also a sanctuary city, obviously. Went to Athens, Georgia, this blue dot where the university is. Allegedly committed more crimes. Shoplifting, was cited for that, had to show up for court, didn't, had a warrant out there for his arrest. And then, allegedly, he murdered this woman. That was all in a pretty short span. Came in September 2022, was arrested for the first time that we know of in New York a year later, 2023. Fled the jurisdiction the next month, committed a new crime that same month, didn't show up for his court appointment. 2 months later, the warrant goes out for his arrest, and then a few months after that, allegedly, he murders this young woman. And I'm very sorry to report, because it's just painful, and I cannot imagine how it must be for her family. A new detail that we've gotten about that murder, because she was out for a jog on a campus where there had not been a murder in 30 years. This man apparently got his hands on her and killed her with such violence that it disfigured her skull. Now, the Rosas report about the man in the country illegally who shot 3 D.C. cops, that was tweeted within hours of this from our colleague Bill Malugin here at Fox News. Let me quote from him. He was citing a local news channel in Virginia, just across the Potomac River. Local media in Virginia, this is Malugin, reporting an illegal alien from Venezuela who crossed into El Paso, Texas in September 2023 and was released into the United States, has now been arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a minor in Campbell County. That's Virginia. He's being now held without bond. So here's an illegal immigrant, also a Venezuelan national, also coming in through El Paso, almost exactly 1 year after Jose Ibarra, the accused killer of Laken Riley. Almost a year later, while Ibarra was busy getting himself arrested for other crimes in New York, this guy, this other illegal immigrant from Venezuela, came across the border in Texas, was allowed and released into the United States by the Biden administration. It's their policy. He made his way to Virginia, where he now stands accused, arrested, and charged of sexually assaulting a child. So those are 3 stories in just the last couple of days. A murder, an attempt to murder 3 cops, and a child rape, all committed by people who are not legally allowed to be in this country. As we have now lived through multiple years of a Biden border crisis that has witnessed roughly 10 million illegal border crossings. Now, if you're a regular listener, you might be thinking to yourself, when is Guy going to do the disclaimer? And the answer is right now. Here's my disclaimer, because here's the thing. Here's why I do the disclaimer. It's because I want to be accurate. I want to be fair. I want to be honest. I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I don't want to smear or tar entire groups of people in a way that is unjust and undeserved. And I also want to take away an excuse argument that we hear from apologists for the Biden regime on immigration and the disaster, the catastrophe at our border. I want to take one of their talking points, address it, put it in a little box, and then put it off to the side to get back to the real point. So here's that disclaimer, as I try to do every time. I am not saying that immigrants or illegal immigrants are a violent group of people, disproportionately so, who commit a bunch more crimes than good, real Americans, so we should all be terrified of immigrants. That's not the point. Yes, it's true. There are some studies and statistics that show that immigrants, legal and otherwise, are less likely to be arrested for crimes and violent crimes than the general U.S. population. I would like to see some of those stats updated because we have now millions of new arrivals just in the last couple of years. That might change things a bit. But at least based on the data that we've got, I'm not saying look at all of these dangerous immigrants. They're all so dangerous. That is not the point. It would be unfair to make that point. The point is that when an American is killed, when American police officers are shot, when an American child is raped, and those crimes are committed by illegal immigrants or people who have no right to be in this country, that is a compounded outrage. You've got the underlying outrage of the crime itself. Then you've got the aggravating outrage that it would seem to be preventable because these people don't have a right to be here to do anything, let alone harm Americans. It is not racist or xenophobic to say that and to be angry about it and to say it's extra unacceptable and to blame the public policies and, yes, the politicians who made these things more likely and in certain cases inevitable. Because if you open the border effectively, which is what they've done. Oh, don't say they've opened the borders. That's not true. There are still Border Patrol and they're arresting people. When you've got 10 million illegal arrivals in 3 years, that's an open border. When you have people flooding across, turning themselves in, knowing they'll be released in many cases, and then they do get released by the millions, that's an open border. It's like they take a little stop along the way to check a box to get processed, but the end goal of entering illegally and getting to stay, they're achieving that. That's an open border. And then, as we always talk about, there's the unknown gotaways and the known gotaways. Unknown gotaways, an unknowable number of people. The known gotaways is a knowable number, and it's 1.8 million, getting closer and closer to 2 million since Biden took office. An extraordinary number of people. Double the number of people who live in Joe Biden's home state. Those are just the gotaways that we know of. And as we make the point every single time, when the incentive structure is to turn yourself in to U.S. officials because you're likely going to be able to stay if you do that, if you are going out of your way not to be encountered, in many cases there's probably a reason why. Because you might have a record. You might be from a gang or a criminal organization or a terrorist group. I mean, think about the criminal aliens and the terror watch list people that they're catching. What about all the people that they're not? Who logic would dictate would be disproportionately represented in the gotaways category. Paying these cartels extra not to be caught or encountered. That is a national security and public safety deep concern in addition to a sovereignty crisis. So no, when I go through these examples, it is not to say these immigrants are a bunch of criminals. No, but some of the illegal immigrants are criminals. And there is no excuse for any of these crimes being committed. Katie Porter is a Democrat from California, member of the House. She's been through some scandals. Apparently she treats people horribly. She's running for a promotion now. She wants to be a senator. So she showed up on CNN and said this about the murder of Laken Riley in Cut 10.
Well, I think when a horrible tragedy like this happens, I think whenever we're dealing with violent crime, there is a sense of outrage, of sadness, and of loss. But I think the important thing to focus on is any one instance shouldn't shape our overall immigration policy.
That's not, I think, how Katie Porter would argue about gun control when there's an outrage. She's not saying, oh, let's not act rashly based on this incident. That's not how they argue about that issue. But in this one, it's like, oh, everyone just take a breath. It is sad. Yes, there's a sense of loss, but And look, there is something to be said. You shouldn't just make every governing decision you do based on a crisis or based on a specific outlier event. But she's talking about one instance. We shouldn't focus on any one instance. Okay, what about 2? What about 3? I just mentioned 3 in the last week. What about the hundreds of people on the terror watch list apprehended? The tens of thousands of criminal aliens interdicted before they entered the country? And, of course, the gotaways. How many instances would it take for Democrats like Katie Porter to say, okay, maybe this should inform our border policy? I am so frustrated by this, as I think you can tell. And it's not like, oh, let's find some bad stories about immigrants to make the point to demonize these people. Absolutely not. That's what you want to say this is, you're dead wrong. And you're obfuscating, you're ignoring the actual issue here, which is the unacceptability of these crimes and the complicity of people who insist that the border's been generally fine, or that we shouldn't do too much, or we shouldn't close the border, and all of it. How many more of these stories can be allowed to happen before you might say, all right, fine, let's close the border? I think for many people the answer is unlimited. They view and value an open border and permissive immigration policies so much that it doesn't matter to them how many Americans are harmed or killed. They don't care. That's the disturbing truth, but I care. I think a lot of people in this audience care. I think the families of those affected care. And even if the people in charge don't, we can speak for those who do, which is why we speak so often about this on the Guy Benson Show. We'll be right back.